So have you ever had one of those moments, maybe an event where you realize it's much more than it looks like on the surface? Something that kind of clicks and makes you see a whole industry differently.
Oh, absolutely. Those moments are rare, but yeah, powerful.
Well, today we're diving deep into exactly that kind of moment. We're talking about Jonathan Anderson's, well, seismic debut for Dior Men's Summer 2026.
Seismic is a good word for it.
Right, because this wasn't just, models walking down a runway. It felt like something else entirely, a really carefully constructed cultural phenomenon.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're really leaning on this fantastic article. It's called Directed by Anderson, Dior's Cultural Comeback. It's by Mark Abergel. He's a luxury executive over in Paris.
Okay.
And he published it like right after the show, June 29th, 2025. So really, really insightful take on what went down.
Great. So that's basically our mission today, right? To kind of unpack how Anderson took this fashion show and turned it into what Mark Abergel calls, and I love this phrase, a IPO of cultural imagination.
It's such a good phrase. Really captures it.
It does. So we'll explore, the layers of thinking behind it, the sort of genius involved, and show you how Anderson wasn't just showing clothes. He was basically scripting a new reality for luxury.
Hmm.
And interestingly, this whole deep dive, it doesn't start with a bang, does it? It
Uh,
starts much more quietly.
That's right. Anderson's debut, well, it opened with this 20-minute cinematic prelude, not your typical fashion show opening at all.
20 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So picture this.
Yeah.
First part, you've got Sam Nivola, the young actor from HBO's The White Lotus.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
He's just wandering through this garden, absolutely drenched in flowers, wearing soft gray knitwear, sort of caressing petals. I think he even pets some sheep.
Wow.
It's described as really languid, sunlit, almost dreamlike, less like a fashion film and more like a meditation on time, texture, touch, very much in line with Monsieur Dior's own original thinking, actually.
That sounds incredibly serene. So different from the usual sort of high energy buzz you expect before a show. What was the point, do you think, of starting so gently?
Well, that's the thing. And then after Nivola, the scene cuts.
Huh.
Now you're with Robert Pattinson,
Okay.
and he's in this like beautiful Parisian hotel suite, golden morning light, and he's just doing normal things,
Yeah.
reading, eating a croissant, sipping a cappuccino. But he's dressed in this very precise, quiet Dior.
Okay.
Very intimate.
Super intimate, domestic, ritualistic almost, like you're watching a character study. It felt like an invitation into this world. And Mark Abergel, in his article, he really flags this. He says, look, this was not a promotional short. It was not content. It was culture.
Wow. Culture, not content. That's a really powerful line.
It is. And it kind of set the tone for everything else Anderson did with this debut.
So how did that idea creating culture, not just content, play out when it came to something usually so promotional like the red carpet? Did they even have one? They did, but it was completely flipped on its head. Guests arriving weren't just, posing for a wall of photographers.
Right.
Instead, Luca Guadagnino, the filmmaker, Call Me By Your Name, challengers.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Big name, huge name. He was there with a camera, a microphone, actually interviewing guests as they arrived. People like Donatella Versace, Rihanna, Daniel Craig, Sylvie Venturini Fendi. For about 2 minutes each.
Interviewing them, not just asking, who are you wearing, I assume.
Exactly. They were asked to properly engage, not just be looked at. Abergel calls it the most intelligent red carpet ever staged because, as he puts it, it made the spectator complicit in the cultural framing. It was basically asking them and us watching, who are you when you are looked at?
That is fascinating. It turns the whole thing inward, doesn't it? Even for the stars. It really sounds like Anderson was directing every single beat, like a film director.
Precisely. That's Abergel's point.
Mhm.
Anderson didn't stage a fashion show. He directed a cinematic experience. Every shot, every little movement felt intentional. It wasn't about revealing products. It was about creating a mise en scène, a whole atmosphere.
Setting.
Yeah. And Abergel says, the storytelling was the silhouette. That pre-show film wasn't just a warm-up act. It was the thesis statement.
Okay.
It really showed Anderson isn't just there to, pick fabrics for Dior. He's there to script the entire narrative of the house.
Right. Okay, so that sets the stage brilliantly. After this really carefully crafted filmic introduction, what about the actual room? The space where the runway show happened. What was that like?
Right, so after that cinematic opening, the story continued, but the setting shifted dramatically. The runway show itself, it took place in this single, very austere room.
Austere. So no huge video screens or dramatic sets.
None of that. No grand theatrics you might expect. Instead, there were just two paintings on the wall.
There's two paintings.
That was it. Two quiet canvases. And they weren't just any paintings. They were by Jean-Baptiste Simeon Chardin. He's an 18th century French master, famous for his still lifes, his focus on domestic scenes, quiet introspection.
Chardin. Okay, I know the name. Very subtle painter.
Exactly. And these were on loan from the Louvre and the National Gallery of Modern Art in Edinburgh. The whole gallery space was lined in velvet, apparently evoking Berlin's Gemälde Gallery. It was minimalist, sure, but not in a cold way. I felt reverent.
Reverent. That's interesting. So the audience walks in, and instead of a buzzing fashion venue, it's more like stepping into, what, a small, curated museum exhibit.
Pretty much. Abergel describes it as having a deliberate silence. Plush floors, matte walls, soft light. He says the room didn't scream, it listened. It was clearly a very conscious choice by Anderson.
Okay, so what's the message here? Why put Chardin, this painter of, humble, everyday scenes, right at the heart of a Dior luxury show? It feels unexpected.
Well, that was Anderson making a really provocative statement. By centering Chardin, who painted things like jugs, folded napkins, fruit, Anderson was basically saying, the everyday is where elegance lives. Luxury is not spectacle, it is culture.
Ah, I see. So the room itself is a metaphor.
Exactly. It wasn't designed to go viral on Instagram. It was designed, as Abergel puts it, as a vessel for the exceptional. A place where the clothes weren't just trends or products, but maybe artifacts.
Artifacts.
Yeah. And each look that came out, walking past those paintings, it felt like it was entering into this dialogue with history. Modern shapes talking to this classical stillness. It was all about restraint, quietness, showing that luxury could be maybe higher without having to be louder.
That's a really powerful way to use space to convey an idea about what luxury means. Very smart.
And it connects back, doesn't it? Anderson said in 2024 he saw himself as a puppeteer behind the scene.
Right.
This Dior show really made that metaphor concrete. It was like directing a cultural moment. He really pushed the boundary of what a fashion show could even be. It became this sort of living museum, full of narrative, a gallery where the clothes were like brushstrokes, revealing something cultural, something lasting.
Incredible. Okay, so we have this very curated, almost sacred space inside. But what about outside? What was the ripple effect? I think you mentioned something surprising happened outside the venue.
Yeah, there definitely was. And what happened outside this little bar in Paris? Well, Abergel suggests it might end up being just as important as what happened on the runway itself.
Oh, what happened?
So there's this popular TikToker, goes by Mad. He decided to host a sort of informal Dior watch party at a bar. Probably thought a few friends might show up.
Okay.
Instead, over 1,000 people turned up.
1,000 people for live stream.
Yeah. Packed the terrace, spilled out onto the street. Abergel says they were glued to the screen like it was the World Cup.
Wow. Like the World Cup for a fashion show. That paints an amazing picture. It really does feel like a new kind of cultural event for the digital age then.
It really does. And Mark Abergel hammers this point home. He says, this wasn't fashion as product drop, this was fashion as live event. Scripted, cinematic, collective, cultural.
Scripted, cinematic, collective, cultural. Got it.
And he notes how, suddenly, a Dior show seemed to have the same kind of emotional pull, that same communal energy as a major sporting event. Which leads right into his big insight. He says Anderson didn't just present a collection, he opened a new portal and asset class for luxury. And for one surreal afternoon, Paris got a glimpse of what fashion could become when it stopped selling to audiences and started speaking with them.
Stop selling to audiences and start speaking with them.
Okay.
And this ties directly into that core idea you mentioned earlier from Abergel.
Exactly.
That what Dior staged wasn't just a show, it was in fact an IPO of cultural imagination. That phrase is just so sticky, so insightful.
It really is. Think about it. In a world where everyone's attention is pulled in a million directions, Anderson basically demonstrated that real, focused, emotional attention, the kind that's collective, cinematic, cultural, that is the most valuable currency luxury, can actually deal in now.
So the show wasn't just selling clothes, it was offering shares in a cultural idea, an investment.
Precisely. A public offering, but for a new kind of value. It's about forging a connection that runs much deeper than just buying the next handbag.
Okay, that makes sense. So if the opening was a film and the room was a gallery, how did the clothes themselves, the actual collection, fit into this? How did they function as part of the screenplay for this new Dior story?
Well, the collection itself felt like it was written, in fabric and gesture and references. Anderson's Dior Men's Summer 2026 wasn't just clothes. It felt like a cast of characters.
The cast, okay.
Yeah, the models didn't just walk. They seemed to inhabit the clothes, inhabit Dior. Each look felt like it was introducing someone new into this world. You had, like, the bookish flaunter type in Donegal tweed, or maybe the poetic rebel wearing an almost 18th century style decadent waistcoat.
Yeah.
Or the haunted romantic, maybe, with this crossbody bag that Abigail says nodded quietly to Dracula.
Dracula. Okay. So these weren't just outfits. They felt like roles. Characters needing a backstory.
Exactly. You weren't just looking at clothes. You felt like you were meeting potential protagonists. It's a totally different lens on a collection.
Yeah, it really is.
And the accessories just layered onto that narrative. So one of the famous Dior book totes, it wasn't just a logo. It had literature titles on it. Les Fleurs du Mal, In Cold Blood.
Baudelaire and Capote. Wow.
Yeah, sewn right onto the bag. Another bag might hint at Lee Radziwill's style. Another might have a touch of Basquiat's energy. So Aberrell points out you weren't just carrying a bag anymore. You were carrying, like, cultural memory, signaling your aesthetic taste, claiming an identity through association.
It really sounds like Anderson is making the point that a Dior man isn't just a customer buying stuff. He's a character stepping onto a stage.
That's exactly it. And the little details back this up. Things like Diorette charms, these sort of delicate, often floral little jewelry bits from Dior's history. They popped up like keepsakes from another time.
Mm-hmm.
There was Rococo embroidery that looked like hidden secrets. Silhouettes felt maybe borrowed from British gentry, maybe French salons. It really felt like, in Anderson's vision, the Dior man doesn't just buy. He sort of performs his identity.
Performs it. Okay.
And Anderson himself said something like, styles is a way of being, of putting things together, of behaving and appearing. It felt deliberate that so many pieces look almost like costumes for a film you hadn't quite seen yet.
Right.
The clothes aren't just there to cover you. They're built to equip these characters. So Dior becomes less about just what you wear and more about, well, how you walk into a room, how you create meaning around yourself, how you signal to the world who you think you are. It's a statement.
That's really profound. So his real talent here isn't just cutting a jacket, it's his ability to weave a narrative through the clothes.
That's the heart of it, I think. Abigail suggests Anderson's true genius isn't necessarily in the silhouette or the stitch alone, but in this narrative fluency. He gets that fashion now isn't just about dressing yourself up, it's maybe more about scripting yourself.
Scripting the self. Wow.
Yeah. And under Anderson, Dior feels like it's becoming this, I don't know, production studio for identity. And this first collection, it felt like he just handed us the first script, and we'll probably be reading it and wearing it for quite a few seasons.
It really was an incredible shift, wasn't it? Taking what could be just another fashion show and turning it into this really complex, multi-layered cultural event. Quite something.
Definitely. And Mark Abigail points out in the article, there was skepticism initially when Bernard and Delphine Arnault picked Anderson to head up both men's and women's lines at Dior. People wondered.
Right, it was a big move.
Huge. But Abigail says pretty clearly that on that afternoon, June 27, 2025, all those doubts evaporated. And digging into just this one article really shows how Anderson managed to script meaning in a way that just landed. It resonated way beyond that room in Paris.
Yeah, it really did.
Okay, so to wrap up, thinking about this whole idea, scripting identity, creating this IPO of cultural imagination, makes you wonder, doesn't it? How might other fields, tech, entertainment, maybe even something like education, how could they start using these kinds of principles to connect with you, the audience, in ways that are maybe deeper, more engaging, ways we haven't even really thought of yet?